Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things." Well, on today's episode, we're going to explore the topic of cognitive behavioral therapy, what's behind our feelings, cognitive distortions, why we resist change, teamcbt, and more. My guest is a clinical psychiatrist, Adjunct Clinical Professor Emeritus at Stanford Medical School, a best-selling author of many books, an award-winning researcher and teacher, and a podcast host. He graduated magna cum laude from Amherst College, received his MD from Stanford University School of Medicine, and completed his psychiatry residency at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. Articles about him have been featured in notable media outlets, including the New York Times and Reader's Digest, and he's been interviewed on more than 1,000 radio and TV shows. Please welcome the man who's providing us the tools to crush the negative thoughts that rob us of happiness and self-esteem so we can start feeling great, Dr. David Burns. David, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
I'm delighted and thank you. I'm honored to be on your show and very excited to hear some questions and see if we can stir up a little excitement.
All right, I love that. Well, I am ready. I hope you are. I know this is going to be a great one, and I also know that just in doing my research, reading your most recent book, listening to interviews, there's so much insight that you bring, so much knowledge and experience, and I can't wait for our audience to learn from you. So let's dive right in. I thought, David, a good starting point for us, just to get the conversation started, would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
Well, I'll tell you what I like most in the world. The thing I enjoy doing is working with someone who's very depressed. People say, "Oh, you must have a terrible time talking to people who are depressed all the time." And it's just the opposite. When I meet someone who's depressed and anxious, especially if they've had a tough time, a lot of failed therapy, I tell myself, and I believe it, wow, I've got so much to offer this person. This is terrific. And when I work with people, I try to complete the treatment in one session. Now, that usually takes 2 hours. I can't do it in an hour. But I treat everybody for free and have for 30 years. And so the only reward that I have is seeing them go from sobbing at the start of the session to joy and laughter at the end of the session. And when that happens, it just makes me high too. When I'm treating other people, in a sense, I'm treating myself. And that's just the greatest feeling in the world to me.
It's amazing. And when I first heard and I first learned that you're able to work with someone for 1 2-hour session and really help them overcome fears and phobias, depression, anxiety, quite frankly, I had to scratch my head and dig a little bit deeper, because I certainly know personally, and I know many others just through my own research, who have been sitting with therapists and psychiatrists for years in talk therapy and trying to resolve some of those challenges that they face. And here you're able to do this in 1 2-hour session. What, if you were able to distill how you're able to do that versus, and I don't want to compare, but compared to somebody else, or if you can maybe draw a correlation between another psychiatrist who sits down with someone for hour-long sessions or 45 minute long sessions for years on end. What's the
Yeah,
difference?
yeah. I ran into a psychoanalyst. We both presented at a conference years ago, and I was just beginning to have this ability to treat people in a single session, and that was what I talked about. And then during the panel discussion, she was some famous psychoanalyst from San Francisco. During the Q&A session, she was seated next to me. I think there were about four presenters. They were all psychoanalysts. I was like the token cognitive therapist at this conference. And she whispered in her ear that some of her patients have been with her, all of her patients have been with her for more than 10 years.
Wow.
And several of them were just starting to make little baby steps forward. And she wasn't saying it out of admiration. She was saying as a put down that, David, you're into fool's gold and I'm into the real thing.
Mm.
And that kind of frosts me because if I had a daughter who was struggling with depression and suicidal urges or feeling worthless, feeling panicky, feeling anxious, and she could go to a mental health professional who could cure her quickly and cause her symptoms to disappear and cause her to get back to feelings of joy and self-esteem, I would kiss that person's feet. But when I was a resident, that was what I was trained in. Just talk to people. I had psychoanalysts supervising me, and they said you're only allowed to say two things every session. You can say, "Tell me more," twice. And after that, you have to go like this, motion with your hands. And it was just horrible. And the patients would come and cry and sob, and they'd get angry and say, "You're not helping me." And then I would say, "Tell me more." And they say, "You just say, 'Tell me more,' and you jiggle your hands." And by that time, I'd run out of "tell me more," so I could just start jiggling my hands. And it was just embarrassing and terrible. And then I went to report to the supervisor at my weekly supervision session what had happened. And they were saying, "Oh, that was a great session because your patient was crying and angry, getting all this repressed anger out." And I said, "Does a time come when they develop joy? Is there a cure? Is that what we're working to, where they go from sobbing and worthlessness and flirting with suicide to saying it's great to be alive?" And they would never answer that question. And we were never measuring anything either. There was just some kind of mystical assumption that we were doing good. And I could see that we weren't. And I said, if there's one thing I want to dedicate my life to, if there's another way to work with people, I want to find out what it is, contribute to it, and make that happen, because this is psychosis, this is absurdity. But no one seemed to notice. It was like being in a huge cult or something, and everyone was following the leader, and no one was questioning what was going on.
Well, clearly you did, and that led you down a different path, which I want to talk about here. But before we do that, I would love it if we could just wind the clock back a bit, because I'm curious how you even became interested in psychiatry, in the mind, in understanding how people think and act. Where were the seeds of that first laid for you?
Well, I think some of it maybe came from my dad being a minister, so I was kind of interested in philosophical types of ideas, but I got turned off pretty early to our church, because they were talking about love and practicing, looking down on people who were Jewish or gay or different in some way. And that I couldn't see that as something very Christian or very loving. But when I was in Amherst College, I majored in philosophy. I would have majored in physics, but I had two brilliant roommates who majored in physics, and they were so much smarter than me. I said, this would be an uphill battle. Do something you're good at. And that was, philosophy came easy to me. And I thought I would go on to philosophy graduate school. But my senior year, one of my roommates, who was a physics major and became a solid state physicist, Phil Allen, So we were talking in Valentine Hall over breakfast, and I said, I'm trying to figure out what to do my honors thesis on. And he said, why don't you do it on Wittgenstein? And I said, who's Wittgenstein? And he says, well, he's a fellow who died not too far back, kind of a European, Austrian philosopher, and it's rumored he solved all the problems of philosophy. And after he died, they published this book that they found a metal box under his dormitory room at Cambridge University in England. And they published it. It's a series of notes, and they say it's the solution to all the problems of philosophy. And if you read that, they say only 7 people in the world have been able to understand it. And so if you can understand it, do your dissertation on it, when you present it to your committee, who are supposed to challenge you, they won't be able to challenge you because the 7 who understand it aren't here at Amherst College. I said, that sounds like a good idea. So I read this book, Philosophical Investigations, and I couldn't understand it. And it wasn't big words or anything. He was asking, like, think about a piece of string. If you look at it under a microscope, you'll see it's just little threads woven together. There's no thread that goes from one end to the other. And then he would say, are you ready now to give up the free will problem? Do human beings have free will? Can you see the nonsense in that problem? And I would say, not really, sir. I have no idea what you're talking about. And then there would be another numbered paragraph, like, say, is the world real? Is the universe real? That's a philosophical problem. So he says, imagine you're driving through Nebraska and you stop at a cornfield and there's a farmer, and you shout out to the farmer, hey, what are you doing? And the farmer shouts back, I'm growing corn. And then he holds up a stalk of corn and says, and it is real. And he says, can you see that and it is real has no value? He's already told you what he's doing. Now, can you give up, say, the question of, is the universe real? Can you see the nonsense in that question? And I would say, I don't quite see it. But then suddenly I was walking across the Amherst campus in the spring of my senior year, and I suddenly got what he was trying to say. And it was real simple, like what the Buddha was trying to say was pretty much the same thing. And I saw the solution to all the problems of philosophy. So I went to my supervisor and says, I don't think I'm going to go on with philosophy. Wittgenstein wanted his students to give up philosophy and do something practical in the world. And I think I could maybe do counseling. That's like what my dad used to do. And so I'm going to go to psychology graduate school. And he says, oh, no, you can't do that. And I said, well, why not? And he says, you have to go to medical school because doctors can prescribe drugs and psychologists can't. And drugs are going to be so important in the future. And I said, but how could I go to medical school? I'm not a pre-medical student. I've never even had a biology class since 7th grade. He says, oh, don't worry about that. He says, you can talk your way into anything. Wow. And so I applied and I got into Stanford Medical School. And that's, so I could become a psychiatrist. And I was a terrible medical student. I cut most of my classes. I never wanted to be a doctor. I was homeless for a while after medical school because I didn't want to go on and do an internship and residency. But then I thought, my gosh, my girlfriend or my wife now is pregnant. We're homeless. People don't take me seriously when I try to counsel them because I'm not charging any money. And if I went on and did an internship and residency, people would think I know something. They wouldn't realize I still didn't know anything. But they would pay me money to come and talk to me. And I said, gosh, then we could live somewhere and we could have food, and like that. So I went ahead and did my internship and residency and started working really hard. And I started at a county hospital and I just loved the people there. We had so many, the most severe, medically severe and psychiatrically severe patients you can imagine. And then I transferred into Penn. And I began doing research. I won awards for my research. I went to the opposite end of the spectrum. But I never did learn anything that helped me with a single patient. I had like 12 years of beyond college training in medicine. And and they kept saying this is going to be so important in your treating people with psychiatric problems. I never once in my career had one patient. I've had over 40,000 hours of therapy with people with severe depression and anxiety. Never once did I have a patient where my medical training helped me understand or solve their emotional problems. But
That
that's how
is
I got to
just
be a psychiatrist.
that is unbelievable to hear, right? So I'm thinking about, as you were describing some of your story here, when you started at that county hospital as an example, here you're presented with all of these interesting and challenging
Yeah.
cases. At no point did you feel that you were actually making an impact and helping these individuals
No,
that you
no,
were
not much.
confronted with?
But well, medically, we certainly were. I mean, I developed tremendous medical skills, surprisingly, because we had so much of everything there. They had 10,000 visits, medical major trauma cases per month, and 10,000 fulminantly psychotic visits as well
Hmm.
per month. But a lot of our patients had severe schizophrenia, and it's still an untreatable disorder. We had medications which maybe made the hallucinations slightly less severe, and compassion is always appreciated by anyone. But I didn't learn a lot for treating the kind of people who were just struggling with depression, low self-esteem, and anxiety, and panic attacks, and things of that nature. And I didn't learn those skills until I transferred into Penn Medical School and completed my residency and did a postdoctoral fellowship. And then I got to working with Aaron Beck, who had developed this kooky cognitive therapy. And I went to his weekly seminars just to prove to myself that he was a fraud and that the methods wouldn't work. And because he said it's due to negative thoughts, not brain chemistry. Well, our research had proven that this chemical imbalance theory of depression was not true. We proved that and published it in the top psychiatric journal in 1975. So I knew that was wrong. But this idea that negative thoughts cause depression and that you could cure depression by training people to change the way they're thinking, that sounded stupid to me. And so I went to his weekly seminar, and there were only about 6 or 7 cognitive therapists in the world. They were all there at his weekly seminar. And he would say, does anyone want help with a case? Well, I had tons of severe cases, and I would also volunteer. I would say, I have this patient who's going to commit suicide tonight if I don't come up with something at this seminar. And he'd say, well, we better put your case on the front burner here. And then
Sure.
I would get really fantastic feedback from him and try it with the patients, and they started popping like popcorn.
Hmm.
And at first, I thought maybe I don't know why this is happening, but these techniques appear to be working. And then I thought, I think this is for real. And I'd like to devote my life to this, to helping develop cognitive therapy and then maybe go beyond cognitive therapy. So I left the university. I had a tenure track position. I had a governmental grant to build a brain serotonin research laboratory at the medical school, like a 5-year grant. And I just told my supervisor and colleagues, I don't want to study brain serotonin anymore because we've already proven that it has no role in any psychiatric disorder. This is a house of cards that we're building here. It's not valid. I want to do something that's going to help people. And I said, I think I'm going to leave the full-time faculty and I'll stay on the voluntary faculty, but I want to open my practice and develop these new techniques. And they put so much pressure on me not to leave. And they said, oh, you're burning bridges. You'll never do research again. You've got a great career. You're known all over the world for your research on brain chemistry, and you've got it made. And I can show you how to test drugs for drug companies, antidepressants, and you'll make millions of dollars on the side. And I said, I don't want to do any of that stuff. I want to find out how to cure people, how to help people who are suffering. And this whole establishment that's built $1 million grants. I don't want any multi-million dollar grants to study brain serotonin or brain chemistry, because it never is going to help a single human being. But I want to do this other thing. And I'm so glad that I left. And all the pressure they put on me was just bullshit, because I do more research now than ever I did when I was a research fellow. With our new app, I get fantastic data flowing in constantly. I do mathematical modeling. We're making all kinds of basic discoveries about how and why people change. And I had the chance to follow my dream and pursue it, and it's paid off. And I'm a pretty happy guy. Too busy for an elderly fart like me, but I couldn't be more excited.
Oh, I will bet. And I'm thinking that at this time there were books out around positive thinking. You have Dale Carnegie, The Power of
Yeah,
Positive
right.
Thinking. You have Maxwell Maltz, Psychocybernetics. There's all kinds of books that have been out for years. And
Yeah.
had any of those types of books ever come across your desk? Had you ever read them and just said, this
No, but I'd
is,
heard
I
about
don't know.
Dale Carnegie's Power of Positive Thinking, and I thought that's kind of some kind of pop psychology thing. And
Sure.
that's what I thought cognitive therapy was at first. And I dismissed it as kind of pop psychology quackery. And then I saw that it was much vastly more than what I thought it was. It was a very emotional and powerful technology. And now, in the years since, and I wrote my first book, Feeling Good, because I had a new practice, so I didn't have that many patients, and I had extra time, and I was used to working 60, 80 hours a week on my research. So I thought, I'll just write stories about people who I'm using this new cognitive therapy on, and that might help them. And that came out in 1980, and that was pretty unpopular. The day it came out, my editor called me. It was impossible to get anyone to publish it because no one wanted a long, boring book on depression. And the day it came out, my publisher said that at the William Morrow and Company, which is now HarperCollins,
Hmm.
he said that she said each release of books, we create a loser list. We know what books are going to lose money, and it's just every now and then we have one that makes a lot of money. And so your book is number one on the loser list. That's
Oh
the
my
president
gosh.
of the company said it has no commercial potential. And so we're not going to support it at all. And so you have to support it. And I said, well, what should I do? And she said, well, we sent your book, Feeling Good, to 10 top magazines for first serial rights, and they all rejected it, like Ladies' Home Journal and Reader's Digest, and all the top, Harper's Bazaar, and all of these magazines. And she said, just get on the phone and call. Here's the phone numbers of the 10 editors who rejected it, and tell them you want them to change their mind. And so I said, okay. So I called these 10 magazines, and it was the same at every place. I would get some receptionist or secretary or some administrator person, and they said, Dr. Burns, we rejected your book, Feeling Good. We do not want your book. We consider your call a form of phone harassment. Please never call us again. And all 10 magazines said the same thing. And I remember jogging home from the train station that night, I would shout out, "You're a loser." And then I would shout out, "No, I'm not. I'm going to make it happen." And then I would shout, "No, you're a loser." And then I would shout out, "No, you're going to make this happen." And then when I got home, I told my wife, Melanie, I said, "We've got to celebrate tonight." And she said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Because all 10 magazines turned down my book, and the president of the company said they weren't going to support it with any advertising and marketing." And she said, "Well, that doesn't sound like something to celebrate. Why should we celebrate?" And I said, "Well, anyone can celebrate, when you're happy, but you don't need to. When you're a winner, you don't need to celebrate. You're happy naturally. You need to celebrate when you've lost, because then you can give yourself love and pamper yourself, show that you love yourself, And so we went out and had a fancy meal. And then I came back and went to work, and it took me 8 years to get it up to the top of the bestsellers list, because it was rejection after rejection after rejection. I don't know if that's the information you wanted, but I thought, since yours is a business, in part podcast, that might be of interest to the listeners. But I finally got a break, and it was because of kindness that I extended to someone, a woman who was a television producer in Cleveland. And I got on the Cleveland Morning Exchange. It's a small local, it's a kind of big in Cleveland, but it wasn't like some national show. And she really liked the interview. And of course, I was thrilled to get an actual television interview. And afterward, she said, I'm depressed. Could you help me? I said, sure. And I gave her about an hour of my time. And she said that she couldn't have children. And so she and her husband adopted an 11-year-old girl that nobody else wanted. She was kind of a wild young lady, and and she told me she keeps running away from home, running away, and I feel like a failure as a mother. So I helped her with the cognitive distortions and how to treat herself in a loving way. And then I sent her a nice letter of thanks after the show for being on her show. And then in 1988, she called me. She said, do you remember me? I said, oh, I remember you. Absolutely. It was just like yesterday to me. And she said, well, you helped me so much. And I told myself, if I ever get on a big national show, you're going to be my first guest. And she said, that something had happened at the Phil Donahue show. One of the producers had died, and that she was called on that show, and that her first show would be in 2 days. And if I could come, she'd give me the entire hour on the Phil Donahue show. And I brought a patient with me who had been horribly depressed, who had had a super rapid recovery, and the show was just blow away. And within 5 minutes of the end of that show, the book was #1 on every bestseller list. And it had sold more in 5 or 10 minutes than it had in the previous 8 years. And it just transformed my career.
David, what an amazing story. And there's different components to that story that I want to amplify or highlight for a moment, because I don't want this to get lost on anyone that is listening to what you were sharing. Number one is persistence, right? So you were committed, you were fully committed,
Right.
and you knew that somewhere inside you, you knew that this was going to make a difference and this was going to help people, which what I'm hearing throughout this entire conversation up to this point is it is all about helping people, right? So you're doing that. So persistence, but then also you said something very interesting that ties into some of the tools that you provide in your books. And it was when you were using the negative self-talk, right? You were walking about and you are telling yourself you're a loser. And then you would say back, you're not a loser, right? So you would reframe, change the language, which I think is really interesting, because that is a tool that you provide to others. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I think it's an important point.
Myself. Treat yourself with love, not with hostility.
Absolutely. I want to ask you something that I neglected to ask. So if we can go back for just one moment, and then we'll stay where we are after I ask this question. So you talked about your father. You mentioned that your father was a minister. When you made the decision to go down the path that you ultimately did, what did your dad think about your chosen career path?
I don't think he thought much of me.
Why? Why do you say that?
Because I questioned him, and I remember saying to him once, do you really believe that Jesus floated up through the sky through the clouds to some place called heaven 3 days after he was crucified, and he became enraged to be questioned, and I kind of saw kind of he was an effective minister. He was loved by a lot of people. He built beautiful churches, and but I've got so many flaws myself. I'm not one to throw stones, but it just hurt me so badly. Like, I had two friends in high school, Dave and Louis Levitas, and they were my best friends. And it was kind of like, I said, do you believe that if you're Jewish, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe in Christianity or believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior? And he said, absolutely. And it just seemed more like hatred than love. And so I became pretty rebellious, and we never reconciled. I finally started talking to him and my mom and people I've lost when I go out for my daily slog. We've had a lot of pets that I've just loved so much, cats and dogs, particularly cats. I've learned so much, especially from one of my cats that I use in my therapy an awful lot. And I talk to him, and I say hello to my mom and dad and other people who have passed away, and just say, I hope you're doing well, and I love you all. But when he was alive, it was sad. But we were just at loggerheads, and that never got reconciled.
Yeah, that's
I was just so angry.
Sure. Well, that's sad to hear. But I'm sure that there are many people that are listening right now that can also, they can understand it, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, but have such a divergent view on things, different beliefs, different philosophies, that it's very difficult to try to coexist in a certain space when there's differences that are so intense.
Yeah,
And so
particularly
thank you.
these days, it's kind of like the Civil War all over again, and brother against brother, and there's so much mistrust. But that, I won't get into politics, except I think everyone, no matter where you are politically, would agree that there's just a lot of hostility and a little short on love or understanding these days, and it's frightening.
It is. And I think that we can all agree on. And I think another piece to that is, no matter whether it's religious beliefs, political beliefs, any kind of beliefs, it is approaching a conversation with the desire to learn, right? You see the shirt that I'm wearing today.
Oh yeah, that's a nice one. I'm listening. Yeah, awesome.
So it is, to me, it is about listening and learning. We may not have a similar view, but and if I'm feeling challenged, it's probably because maybe I was brought up to believe something different than you, but I'm willing to listen and open my eyes and learn from you and walk away from the conversation saying, you know what? David shared something with me that really made me think. I want to understand more about that, and maybe I'll go do my own research. It may change my view, it may not, but I didn't have to get angry about it. I was interested in learning from you about it.
Yeah,
so
great. Love that.
With all that said, you've already alluded to this, but share with everyone what truly is behind our feelings. What is it that is undergirding our feelings?
Well, there's two big things that have kind of, as I've evolved CBT and what I call teamcbt and developed the new app, there's two overpowering ideas. One is easy to explain, and one is I haven't figured out an easy way yet. But the easy one is, as you say, Epictetus, and I didn't believe that early on, but you feel the way you think. In other words, depression does result from negative thoughts, the messages you give yourself. And so does anxiety. So does anger. And when you're depressed, you're telling yourself, "I'm no good. I'm a loser. I should be better than I am. I shouldn't have screwed up. And look how talented everyone else is. And there's nothing special about me." And then anxiety. I know when I give my talk, I'm going to blow it. My mind will go blank. People are going to laugh. My reputation, they'll start talking about me. The word will spread, and things of that nature. And the second idea, which is attached to that, is that those thoughts are not valid. Depression and anxiety are the world's oldest cons. You're giving yourself distorted messages. And so I've developed like maybe 140, 150 techniques to help people smash those messages you give yourself, like I'm no good, and whatever they happen to be. And the moment you stop believing those messages, at that moment you'll recover. Your feelings will change. That was the first big idea that was cognitive therapy, and Beck popularized it. I popularized it. Albert Ellis popularized it. Epictetus did 2,000 years ago. The second idea came to me much later, and that's that a lot of people will fight recovery. So if you're depressed and someone tries to help you become undepressed, you'll kind of resist them. You yes but them. I've already tried that type of thing. People will fight against recovery from anxiety. People with relationship problems want to cling to the relationship problem. That person's a jerk. He's to blame. I don't want to get close to that asshole type of thing. And it's just, I don't want a loving relationship with that person. And that's called outcome resistance. And I recognized that it was real and that it was the cause of nearly all therapeutic failure in the treatment of depression. It's not that we don't have the methods to crush the distorted thoughts. It's that the person is rejecting the help that's being offered. And that's called outcome resistance, that the person thinks, I don't deserve to be happy. I haven't done anything special yet. I'm going to keep beating up on myself until I achieve some great accomplishment, and then I can be happy. And that's called outcome resistance. I don't want to feel happy today because I'm not good enough. I haven't achieved enough. I don't have a loving partner in my life, something like that. And then the other thing is called process resistance. You may want to overcome your depression, but you don't want to do what you're going to have to do to get undepressed. So for myself, for example, I was a perfectionist, and I didn't want to give up my perfectionism. I would beat up on myself if I had a patient that wasn't recovering, or if I had a research problem that I couldn't solve. And I'm going to beat up on myself until I find the solution. And what I learned from one of my cats, Obi, was a feral cat that we adopted, was to give up the idea that you have to be special to have a joyous life, to accept our mediocre, below average, screwed up selves. And that blew my mind when I learned that and grasped it. And so the second part of the new teamcbt is I've developed about 15 or 20 techniques to reduce resistance to change, the outcome resistance and the process resistance. And those are very joyful, paradoxical, unexpected techniques where I teach my patients not to change, but to see the beauty in their depression and their self-criticalness and their anxiety, constant worrying, and your guilt and shame and loneliness and anger, what these feelings show about you that's beautiful and awesome, and how those feelings help you. And the moment the patient sees that, and this is a sudden revelation to people because we're taught that these are due to mental disorders. That's what I was taught in medical school. And sometimes they are, like schizophrenia is a true mental disorder, and bipolar manic depression is a true mental disorder based on some abnormality of brain tissue. But feeling down, feeling anxious, these aren't mental disorders. These are just feelings. And when you become proud of those feelings, the paradox is that they disappear quickly. Recovery is just a stone's throw away. And that's the one I haven't figured out a quick way to explain it, but it's really the secret sauce of the new therapy I've developed. It's why I can get people better in 2 therapy sessions, and it's one of the keys to the Feeling Great app that we've developed, that we're seeing super rapid changes in people now. The app we had developed, it started out as a Feeling Good app about a year and a half ago, and we did a beta test of that with 290 people and saw changes in 7 negative feelings in 3 days, reductions in the 50 to more than 60% in all 7 negative feelings: depression, anxiety,
Wow.
anger, loneliness, hopelessness. And then in the last year, we've added AI to it. And so now we're seeing those changes with most app users within the first 72 minutes, actually, with the app. And that level of change, you might not see that in outcome studies of antidepressants and psychotherapy that go on for 6 months or a year or even 2 years. So it's causing very fast changes. And one of the sad feelings I have right now is we haven't figured out how to market the app and let people know that there's something there. You can try it for free. It's in both app stores. It's the Feeling Great app. It costs 27 cents a day to use it, and it should get you better in an hour. And if you can't afford the 27 cents a day, we give it away for free. And so we're thinking the whole world should be tuning into this. And you might know how to market. We have to figure out how to market it. It's the same problem as when Feeling Good came out. No one was interested in it at first, and they didn't believe there was something powerful in there. But anyway, if you're struggling right now listening to this show, or feeling like you're not good or anxious or not happy about your life, you can check it out, and you can use it for a week or 2 for free, and it doesn't take long to impact you. And
well, I have it on my phone, and we're certainly going to provide a link where everyone can download the app and also download a copy of both Feeling Good and Feeling Great, because they're 2 incredible books, and talk about being able to make an impact. And the way, this is one of the reasons why I really wanted you on this podcast, is because
Thank you so much.
Your story is a very powerful one. The tools that you provide, the type of therapy you provide. And, it amazes me that for over 30 years, you have been providing sessions for no charge to help people, and you've helped countless people. But not only are you helping the general public, I've listened to and heard from a number of psychiatrists, therapy professionals who have also learned from you, right? They're using the app. They're also using your teamcbt methods in their own sessions and seeing dramatic changes. So you should feel pretty amazing to know the ripple effect that has been created as a result of the efforts that you've put in, all the work that you've done, and the thousands upon thousands of hours of sessions and research that you've done yourself. And I want to share something with everyone that's watching and listening right now. I mentioned we're going to provide a link to these incredible resources. Yes, we're going to do that. I want you to know something, that the book Feeling Great, which I'm about, I'd say a little over 3/4 of the way through right now.
Go.
Yeah, it's an excellent book, but here's the interesting thing that I wanted to share with everyone that's watching and listening right now. This book provides truly practical and actionable tools, real tools that you can use in your own life for treating depression and anxiety. And it's based on 40 years of research and more than 40,000 hours of treating individuals. So this is science-backed. David, you provide some very, very interesting case studies, and you go into the conversations that took place with these different individuals. I would love it if you would share, because resistance is such a huge area within this entire modality. I would love it if you would share maybe give us an example of one type of resistance that comes up, just one example, and then what you're able to do to break down the wall of resistance.
That's good. Let me see if I can think of a patient vignette. I've recently, a colleague came for help. She was and we actually have a video of the session, and I published it on a podcast, but she was a lovely woman, and she's a East Coast psychiatrist specializing in short-term treatment of people with severe anxiety disorders. And she was doing great in her practice, but then had two patients who did not respond rapidly. And she began beating up on herself, looking at those two and telling herself, I'm a failure and a fraud. And you think, well, that shouldn't bother anyone. Well, when you look at someone else's thoughts, you see how hard they're being on themselves needlessly. But when it's you yourself, you kind of get a blind spot. And she was getting to where she could pretty much not sleep at night. She's constantly worrying, constantly beating up on herself, telling herself I should send their money back. I probably need a new career. I have no skill as a psychiatrist. I'm a fraud. And it was very, very severe. And, and so initially in the session, I empathized with her, just repeating what she was saying and paraphrasing without trying to help, until she gave an A in empathy. And empathy is great to have, but it doesn't cure anyone of anything. You have to have a lot more than that. And then we did something called the magic button, saying, Amy, suppose there's a magic button. Like what is if a miracle happened in the session, by the end of the session, what miracle would you be hoping for? And she said what almost everyone says, well, all my negative thoughts and feelings would go away, and I wouldn't feel worthless and like a fraud, and I'd have joy, and I could enjoy my life. And I said, suppose we have a red button here. Let's see. Can you see that red button? Okay.
Yes, sir.
It's actually just my hand. but if we have a red button, the magic button, you press it, all your negative thoughts and feelings will suddenly vanish like a flash with no effort. Would you press it? And she says, oh, in a heartbeat, I'd press that. She knew a little about, she said, I'm not so sure. But most people would say, yeah, I'd press that magic button. And then I said, but before you press that button, maybe, I'm not so sure it'd be a good idea to do that. I have techniques that I could maybe make all your depression and anxiety disappear by the end of this session? Absolutely, I do. I can't guarantee it, but I can tell you it's very likely to happen, and I believe it is going to happen. That's my prediction, but I don't think it's right to do that. And generally the patient will say, well, why not? That's unfair. I want those techniques. And I say, well, before we do that, let's look at what your negative thoughts and feelings show about you. That's positive and awesome. That's number one. And number two, let's look at how these negative thoughts and feelings are helping you. Now, she was feeling 100% depressed, 100% anxious, on a 0 to 100, 100% guilty and ashamed, 100% inadequate and worthless. She was feeling lonely, hopeless, angry with herself. Can you, Jay, think of any positives in some of those feelings? What do they show about her that's awesome? How might they help her?
Well, you're going to have to help me out here.
Okay, I will. I said it sounds kind of like you're perfectionistic, and you're kind of beating up on yourself as a whole because you're stuck with two of your patients. And what are some benefits of your perfectionism? You've been doing this to yourself all your life. And she said, well, I've worked very hard. I've accomplished a lot. She's on the teaching faculty of one of the famous East Coast medical schools. She's a lovely, highly skillful therapist. What does it show about her, what she thinks about her patients?
That she truly cares. She
Yeah,
wants
yeah,
the
yeah,
best for them.
yeah. And she's beating up on herself because she has two who are stuck. How beautiful is that? Is that important that she
Well,
cares
it
about her patients?
of course it is. It's
Is
very
it is it
important.
is it valid that she cares about her patients?
It's valid. It shows that level of care,
Is it
and
is it powerful?
very powerful. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And then what's good about your anxiety, Amy? And she said, well, it motivates me to work like crazy when I'm not making progress with the patient instead of giving up on the patient. And I said, is that important? She said, absolutely. Uh, and so we went through, we got about a dozen beautiful things that showed about her. And then I said, well, now, Amy, why would you want to press that magic button? Because if you do, then all these beautiful things are going to fall apart. They're going to disappear. They're going to go down the toilet right with your negative thoughts and feelings. Why in the world would you want to do that? And that's the paradox. Do you see? So I've become her resistance. Rather than I'm trying to persuade her to change, I'm trying to tell her, you're going to have to persuade me to work with you. It doesn't
Amazing.
make sense. Look at what the beauty that this shows. And then she says, "Yeah, but I could function just as well with much lower levels of all of these things. I don't need to be 100% where I'm not sleeping. I'm ruining my life. How can I help my patients if I can't help myself?" That's that motivational step, and it was absolutely necessary. And then we went into methods. We used identify the distortions, externalization of voices. From that point on, it took about 15 minutes to blow all of her negative thoughts away and put her into a euphoric state. Like then she could see the all or nothing thinking and the thought, I'm a failure and a fraud. Well, because you're stuck with two patients? What percentage of psychiatrists are stuck with most of their patients? And then she could suddenly
Right.
see, and then and when you're stuck with a patient, like what specifically are you doing wrong? Could you get a consult from a colleague, maybe from me or from Jill Levitt, or and maybe find out the exact error you're making with these two patients and learn? And would that be okay? And all of a sudden, she just started popping like popcorn, and she was able to blow her negative thoughts out of the water because they were all just terribly unfair and terribly distorted. But that's how it works. In the old days, I would have struggled with her for maybe 12 weeks or so, fighting through her resistance. And then if she recovered in 12 weeks, I would have thought that's really way better than when I was a psychiatric resident. Nobody ever recovered. But now we can compress that 12 weeks or 16 weeks into 2 hours in most cases, nearly all cases.
That is truly amazing. And it reminds me, David, of almost like the martial arts in a way where
Oh
we're
yeah,
taught
oh
not to
yeah,
use
right,
force against force. So
yeah,
that resistance, if I'm pushing against it, I'm
yeah,
going like this, right? Force against
yeah,
force, which is
yeah,
never a good idea.
yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. And again, for all of you that are watching and listening right now, David provides plenty of examples through actual case studies and walks you through each of these different tools, talks about the cognitive distortions, actually gives you worksheets on how you can find the, kind of break down the resistance piece of this. So there's great information in both of these books, and also, of course, the app is quite incredible as well. So again, we're going to link to that. So David, as we are wrapping up our conversation today, I really could speak to you for hours, and I really appreciate your time here today. I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting immediately?
Well, it's something that people resist doing, and I've been saying it ever since my first book, Feeling Good, came out, and you might have noticed it in Feeling Great. I give a written exercise to the reader, and I say, write your negative thoughts here, or write down what are the distortions in this thought. Do the written exercises. And then on the next page, it says, did you do that? I know you didn't. Go back and do it. And I would say the simplest thing is to write down your negative thoughts when you're feeling depressed or anxious or angry. What are you telling yourself? And you'll see if you're depressed, you'll be telling yourself you're not good enough. You'll be blaming yourself for things. You'll be labeling yourself as a loser or a failure. You'll be focusing on your flaws. That's called mental filtering. You'll be saying that your positives don't count. You'll be involved in all or nothing thinking. Write those thoughts down. And even though you're certain it's a waste of time, just waste the time and write them on a piece of paper. I'll show you what a piece of paper is. See, here's a clipboard with a piece of paper, and then you take something called a pen like this, and you write down what you're telling yourself. And you'll be surprised to see that those messages are extremely negative. And then if you look at my list of 10 cognitive distortions, all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, self-blame, mental filter, mind reading, should statements, emotional reasoning, you'll find those thoughts contain all of those distortions. And those are great first two steps. And then you can say to yourself, is there a kinder way I could look at this? Would I talk like this to a dear friend who was upset, or to my child who was crying, was bullied at school and has come home crying? Would I say, oh, you're such a loser, you're so inferior? You wouldn't say mean things. See, the thing is, you're bullying yourself. And that's what people don't quite understand. They think I'm really no good. What you don't understand is what's really happening is you're bullying yourself with a mean-spirited message. And the minute you stop doing that, your feelings will change. And it's so simple that people have trouble believing it, but try it out. That's what I did. Prove me wrong. That's what I tried to do. I tried to prove that Beck was wrong in my early days. I presented a patient one of my first cognitive therapy patients was someone referred to me from the intensive care unit, an elderly woman from Latvia who had attempted suicide, and she survived. And they sent her to me for follow-up. And I asked her, could I present your case in this cognitive therapy conference? I'm going to this new thing I'm trying to learn, and maybe I can get some tips on how to help you. And she was very gracious and pleased that I would do that. And I asked Dr. Beck at the conference, I said, of this elderly woman who tried to kill herself, how could I help her with what we were then calling cognitive therapy? And he said, well, all her feelings result entirely from her thoughts. Just ask her what she was telling herself just the moment before she attempted suicide. I said, that makes good logical sense. That's one of the things I loved about Beck. We had our differences for sure, but he was very logical and helpful in the things he came up with. So I went and I said, Dr. Beck said I should ask you what you were telling yourself. And she said, oh, that's easy. I was telling myself I was a worthless human being because I've never accomplished anything in my life. I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, all I've ever done is clean people's houses and scrub their floors and that type of thing. And that's it. I'm just a worthless human being. I've never done anything important or meaningful with my life. So what should I do? I said, I don't know. I have to go. If you wait another week, I'll ask Dr. Beck what's the next thing to do. She said, okay, that's fine. You go and find out. And I asked him, and he said, well, just ask her to take a piece of paper and write down 3 or 4 things she has accomplished. I thought, oh, yeah, that's so logical. So I went back the next week, and she said, what did he say? And I said, he just said to write down on a piece of paper, 3 or 4 things you have accomplished, or just tell me what are some things you have accomplished. She said, that's my problem, doctor. I told you last week I've never accomplished anything. And so what should I do? And I said, well, why don't you take it as a homework assignment? And maybe you'll think of something. Well, I went back the next week to see her, and I did my usual thing that I'd been doing for years and not seeing any results. You need a renewal of your antidepressants and kind of non-specific talking like I was trained to do in my psychiatric residency. And halfway through the session, she said, well, aren't you going to ask me about my homework? I said, oh, yeah, I forgot. Did you think of anything? She handed me a piece of paper with about, 8 things on it. And the first one, she says, I forgot that, you see, my husband and all of our family died in the Nazi concentration camps. But I managed to smuggle myself and my 2 boys out of Latvia, and we made it back to the United States. And I saved their lives, and I got jobs cleaning people's houses and scrubbing floors. So we'd have a roof over our heads and a bed to sleep in and food on the table. And she said, and I thought that might count as an accomplishment of sorts. And my son just graduated first in his class at the Harvard Business School. And I said, well, God, that's fantastic. And the second thing on her list was I forgot that I speak 5 foreign languages fluently. And then the third thing was I'm a gourmet chef. I forgot about that. She had all of these incredible things that she'd done. And I said, how do you reconcile that with your belief that you're a worthless human being who's never done anything worthwhile? And she says, I can't, Dr. Burns. It doesn't make any sense now. I have no idea why I was telling myself that. It's so ridiculous. And I said, how are you feeling now? And she says, I'm feeling a whole lot better. Just at this moment, my feelings changed. She said, do you have any more of these techniques? And I said, well, you have to wait another week. That's the only one I've learned so far, and I'll get another one and come back next week. But that's how it was in the early days, and that's what I'd always wanted to be able to do. And I helped her. I saved her life, but she helped me. She changed my life at the same time, because I said, yes, it really is possible. Change of a profound nature can happen, and it can happen rapidly. And that's what my whole life has been about.
That is such a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. My friends, change your thoughts, change your feelings. This has been an incredible conversation. David, I want to thank you so very much for not only bringing your books to life, but for sharing time and space with us today and sharing of your insights, of your knowledge, and of your experience, your storytelling. I'm just so grateful, and I appreciate it. I know that those ripples that you've already created are going to continue to expand throughout all of our listeners of this podcast as well. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Jay. And I can see why you're popular and why your podcast is popular and successful, because of the warmth and the joy that you bring to this podcast, and I'm sure to all of your podcasts. It was just fantastic experience for me to get to know you, and I hope our paths cross again one day.
I certainly hope so. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. would you take just a moment and subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and be able to attract amazing guests just like Dr. David Burns. And to listen to more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And until next time, my friends, keep learning and growing. Please make sure you pick up a copy of Feeling Great and download the Feeling Great app. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.